All right, welcome everybody for our day 7 session on the Ampscript Bootcamp. Hold on a second, I don't know why this isn't, there we go, sorry. So super excited, thank you everyone who's continuing to go throughout this, this session. This is our 7th session and could be more excited for these two functions, for encrypt and especially the string functions. There's a lot of great functionality here. We're going to be doing the typical format. We're going to go over those functions and then diving right into the platform to give you some use cases to take away. So today we're going to be going over those two functions, and then we've got 3 sessions coming up. We'll talk about this at the end of our presentation today. These are going to be hands-on sessions. We're going to be inviting you to build right in the platform with us. We'll have instructors, whether it's myself, JB, Sandesh, Michelle, or even a guest instructor to walk you through those use cases. So those are going to be the next 3 weeks. So definitely bookmark those in your calendar. We'll talk about more of those at the end of this session. All right, so string and encrypt functions. Let's start off with encrypt. So today we're going to cover the encrypt and decrypt symmetric functionality with a use case. And then we'll just briefly cover the rest of the functionality functions available in this category. So encrypt and decrypt, so what does this do? This gives you the ability to, when you have those sensitive data points that you're using in your solutions, primarily the use case would be a cloud page, where you want to encrypt that data so it's not facing out there that someone couldn't search and find that on that cloud page. So this gives you the ability to encrypt those data points so that you can use variables or encrypted variations of those data points in your solutions instead. So there's two examples here. They're very similar. Where you would encrypt your data point and then you would decrypt it so that you can actually use it in your solution. So let me just dive in. We'll go right into the platform and go over how we're going to build this and use this solution. So what you might notice this email, we use this one of our earlier sessions. We're going to build this in Ampscript in the email content itself, and then we're going to sort of show it how it's going to be used in a cloud page itself. So from an earlier session, this is a welcome email, and I've got in here a header script, which is a code snippet block where I've got a variety of different commented out sections where we're going to be doing our work. We've got 4 demos today. So we're going to start here in this first demo section, which is our encrypt and decrypt section. So let's talk about this first use case. What we want to do is we want to use for our cloud page an ability for that cloud page to do an API call back into Marketing Cloud. Whether we're passing data, whether we're pulling data, you need to make that API call connection. And to do that in Marketing Cloud, you use install packages. I don't think we've covered this, might have been covered in one of the experts before, but you create an install package to allow that connection, that third-party connection to Marketing Cloud via API call. And there are 4 key data points to make that connection. There's a client ID, a client secret, and then this auth URL and a REST URL. So for this example, what you would like to encrypt, what you wouldn't want to be facing in your cloud page would be these client ID and client secret, because if they were front facing, if someone did an inspect and found them, then they could connect in your environment and you want to avoid that. So for this demo, what we're going to do is we're going to take this client ID, and this is what we're going to want to walk through, how we can encrypt this code, this bit of code, and use it in the cloud page without exposing this in the cloud page itself. So I'm just going to copy this. We're going to go back into our Ampscript section, and we're just going to paste in that, that syntax. So we're going to, let's set this as a variable. We're going to set this as client ID. And just for this purposes, we'll just use that as an example. Okay, so this is what we want to encrypt. Let's go into the Salesforce guide into encrypt symmetric and understand how we can encrypt this data using this function. So encrypt symmetric has got quite a few numbers to this function, but they're relatively straightforward. The first variable is the text, or the variable in our case that you want to encrypt. The second is this algorithm, which I'm not sure the complete details on it, but it's something you sort of just keep from the example that's provided. And then after that, there are 3 sets of keys that you're going to use to, sort of triple encrypt this data point. So there is a salt key, an IV key, and a SIM key that's typically used here. So let's just go down, provide a really helpful example here, and we'll just copy that, and we're going to bring that over into our environment and use that as an example. Okay, so we're setting a variable is enc data is equal to the encryption of this data point. So our first value is that variable that we're looking to do the encrypting in this example. This AES, that's the algorithm. You just want to leave that in place. And then we've got this 3 sets of keys here that we want to put in the variables that you're using for those keys. So I've got these variables set up here, and let me just quickly show you for key management. We're not going to go into how to create keys in this session, but just so that you have an idea of how to do it. There's a lot of great resources on YouTube. Definitely utilize Cameron Robert. He's got a great walkthrough on how to create a SIM, SALT, and IV key. It's relatively straightforward. But the most important point is you want to keep these external keys. These are what is going to trigger those keys in your solution. So back here in this environment, I've got these captured, and I've got these set to certain variables. So all you need to do here is just copy your keys, the 3 different keys. So I've got this SIM key, and I'm going to paste in here for this key here. We've got an IV key. I'm going to paste that in here, and then we've got the salt key, and we're going to paste that in there. You leave this at null as is, and that should do it. So let's just proof this out. So we're going to render in the email itself, we're going to render the client ID, and then we're going to see what comes through for this in the encrypt data, what that value comes through. It's kind of helpful just to see what that encryption is. So to do that, I'm just going to duplicate this content block. I'm going to go inside this block, and I'm just going to remove this text, and then I'm just going to name this. So we're going to, first of all, we're going to render out the client ID, and let's remove this BR. And that variable was called client ID. And then we're just going to copy this so that we can output the encrypt ID as well. Let me just here, just so that so for the encrypt key, let's just title this encrypt ID, and this data point was titled ENC data, I believe. Okay, so that should output that client ID and the encrypted ID. So let's just preview that and see what comes out for our output. Okay, so here's that client ID, and then here's that encrypted ID. You can see it's completely just this long text of information that you can use instead of this client ID. So there it is encrypted. Now we're going to go back and we're going to decrypt it. So we should see it output back out as this client ID. So let's go back into our header script. And we're going to go here and let's go back into our documentation. We're going to find the decrypt version, which is very similar to encrypt. Same number of fields, but instead of this being the client ID field, we're going to be putting in our encrypted field in here. So let's go back again. We're going to copy the syntax, and then let's paste that in here. Let's just call this DEC data, just a little bit clearer. You're seeing it's pulling in that encrypt data right here, which is kind of handy. And then all we're going to do is we're going to copy, since the rest of this ends exactly like the encrypt, we're just going to copy how the encrypt ended. And here again is the SIM key, IV key, and salt key there. So what we want to do now is we want to output this decrypt data in our content builder just to use it as an example. So let me just paste that in here, and then I'm just going to copy this BR. And we'll just call this decrypt data. And then we're going to be outputting the DEC data, not the ink data. Okay, so let's just see how this outputs. We should see this come back and be the actual client ID. So there you go. The original, the encrypted value, and then when you're decrypting in your solution, it'll return this value. You don't need to return it to see it, but you'll be using that variable, that DEC data, to use in your solution to output that. So that's how straightforward it is. Again, you're not going to be using it in this environment. You're going to use it in the cloud page. So let me just go to this cloud page and give you an example of how this would be used in a real world example. So this cloud page is sending an API call to a journey based on the recipient's response in the journey path itself. And you can see it's got information from an install package, got the auth URL, the REST URL. For the client ID and the client secret, you don't see the actual client ID and secret. We've got the encrypted data here. So again, it's front facing, it's secure. And then what it's doing is it's decrypting these values and setting those two variables, the DEC client ID and the DEC client secret. So these values will now include those client ID and client secret in there. So later on in the code, we're just converting those two values to JavaScript values, the client ID and secret. And then later on, we're actually doing that auth call. We're just using client ID. And then we're using client secret. We're not using the actual values. So again, this is a great way to be secure. How you can use those sensitive data points, but you use them in an encrypt way. And you can do the steps that I did in a cloud page itself. Just for demonstration purposes, it was a little bit easier to do it in an email content standpoint, still the same execution. And one more thing I just wanted to point out, what can be helpful is for you to have documentation of this within your team. So here's an example of the little documentation that I created. It's got the SIM keys, it's got those keys, those external keys, and it's got those data points. So again, here's that client ID data point. You actually could delete this in your documentation, and all you do is have these encrypt keys. So you're documenting, even in documentation, you're not even exposing those keys in your documentation. You're just keeping those encrypted keys, and then you just use this instead of the actual data point there. So that wraps up encrypt and decrypt. And just wanted to pause there for a second to see if there were any questions on how how that was executed. Any questions about encrypting, decrypting data? Okay, no questions. Let's go back into our slide deck. And okay, so covered encrypt and decrypt. The rest of the functions are a little specific. The base 64, encode and decode, MD5, and then the SHA variations. These are all variations for either encoding or converting functions depending on your use case. I've seen the encrypt symmetric and decrypt symmetric as more commonly used, so definitely would lean toward those use cases whenever you need to encrypt and decrypt. But if your solution requires it, obviously there's more depth in the function for that as well. And then I definitely want to call out GUID. GUID's kind of a handy little tool. I didn't want to demo that today, but if you ever need a unique key for a user, or not for a subscriber, for a use case, GUID is also very, very handy to create the GUID functionality. It returns a unique value that you can quickly and easily use if subscriber key, for example, isn't usable in your use case. All right, so let's jump into the string functions. So there's a ton here I'm excited to dive into. Today we're going to be covering on the core side, we're going to be covering Concat, a couple of different ways to use Concat. We're going to use Substring, index of, a couple of ways to use an index of. We're going to cover formatting, whether that's, I think we're going to be using proper case and then format a date. So there's a lot of great functionality here. And then we'll cover some of the more specific use cases of like regex, max, length, and some of these other functions. But we've got a couple of great demos here to take you through. So let's talk about Concat. This one is a function, it's one of my favorite functions. So what Concat does, allows you to do, is to basically concatenate various variables or text into a variable. So instead of just outputting a single variable, you can combine, as you can see here in this example, we've got variables, we've got HTML text, all in one variable. So we've got a couple of different use cases to go there. Gives you an ability to render an extended string of information, or even to compound and do dynamic tables in Ampscript. It's highly used and a fantastic function. Substring is another great function. It returns a small part of a string depending on how you want to use it. So in our use case today, we're going to have a variable that has a first name and a last name in a variable, and we're going to want to use substring to just pull out the first name. So that's primary use for that tool. And then index of has a lot of functionality, a lot of different ways to use it. It basically returns the position within the string of what you're searching for. And so that we're going to be able to use in Substring to help find that last name and cut it out, just render the first name. And then we're also going to use it in an example for an if statement. So you're sort of using it to set a flag for a variable itself. It's got a lot of great uses there. And then we'll dive into formatting a little bit. So we're going to be using, there's 3 different options for changing the case. We've got upper, lower, and proper case. So we're going to be using proper case for our example to initial caps, the first letter of a name. And then format takes a data point and formats it to a certain date format. So we've got a lot of different functions to show you. Let's dive right into the platform and go into our first use case. Okay. So again, there's three demos we're going to go through today to improve the functionality of this welcome email. So the way this welcome email, now the first thing what we want to do is we want to improve this call to action button. So when we currently click on this call to action button, it goes to the home page, which is great. But it's kind of generic, and it doesn't really include any tracking information that we want to pass to the website. And so we had talked about this before. This email is to be sent to those new loyalty members who've signed up. There are ambassadors, and we want to give them, first of all, thank them for coming, and also give them an ability to follow a couple of different steps to help maximize their ambassadorship or their loyalty points. So when they click on this call to action button, we'd like to take them to the ambassador page and also pass some tracking information so that we can know when the website hits it, maybe by Marketing Cloud personalization, we can link that to a certain person. So let's find a way to do that using the concat function in the tracking itself. So we're going to go back into our code snippet. We're going to go to the second section, which is where we're going to be building that using that concat function. So we're going to want to set a couple of variables. The first variable we're going to want to set is our home page. So we know that because we went to the homepage site, and so we're just going to copy this homepage URL, and we're going to set that as a variable. Next, we want to set the ambassador page as well, because we want to add that to our URL string. So the only difference between ambassadors is just we're going to add this ambassador's location on the website, and we'll add that into as a variable as well. Let's also create a tracking tab, a tracking variable, so we can add that to our URL string. So let's just say we want this to be AMP7 as a tracking code. And then last but not least, we want to output the subscriber key, but we actually have that available up here. It's something that we're setting early on in the email itself. Okay, so let's go and use the concat function to combine all of these different variables into one string. So I'm going to navigate down to the concat variable and see what it's got here for syntax. It's relatively straightforward. It's basically the concat, open paren, close paren, and you can put any of those variables that you want in here. So I'm just going to copy the beginning of this function, and let's just bring it over into our header script. So let's just set the URL that we want to output a concatenation of a couple of things. So the first thing we want to do is it's going to begin with the home page. We're going to set this as the first variable in our concat statement. And then we're going to want to also include the ambassador's page in that URL string. So let's just copy this. And then all you need to do is separate that by a comma. And then since we're going to start our tracking information, we want to add a question mark just to delineate the URL for the homepage to the tracking information. So to do that, you're just going to use a single quote. You can use double quotes, and you use the text variable in there, and you just surround it by a comma. And then we're going to add in our tracking information as another variable. And then we're going to want to add our next parameter, which is going to be that subscriber key. So again, we need to use an ampersand just to break those two parameters up. And we're going to use a comma. And then let's also, I think we can use it within this paren, this ampersand. Let's say that this is going to be sub ID equals, and then we're going to end that with a comma. And then we can pull up our subscriber key that's being set up above as our final variable in this concat statement. So hopefully we should be able to see the homepage with the extended URL, some tracking information, and then the subscriber key should be a contact ID that gets outputted on that URL, all being used on that concat functionality. So let's just copy this URL. We're going to go into this call to action button, and we're going to modify in our href right here of how we're going to call this URL. So we're going to use the redirect to function. I think this was covered by Sandesh in an earlier session, or maybe been Michelle. So we're just going to paste in here that URL, and then we're going to end this with a %%. So that should redirect it to that URL that we set in the concat statement. So let's just do a quick preview of that to make sure that that works as expected. And then if we click into here, so here's that URL that we added thanks to the concat function. We've got the main URL through default. It's added the ambassadors section. We've landed on the correct section of the page. Now we've added in our tracking information, and then our second parameter's got that sub ID equals, and then here's that subscriber key that's being passed. So there's a quick and easy way to use the concat function to combine a variety of different variables and text to return a variable that you can render and use for tracking purposes. All right, so that's the first use case. The second use case we want to build, let's take a look at, again, how this email is being previewed. So I don't know if those have attended the earlier session. We've got a send test data extension where we're sending this email to those ambassadors. And one of the fields we have included here is name. And so we see it hits me here, it's being rendered as Paul. Unfortunately, within this data extension, we don't always have that name populated. So we're doing actual lookup to a separate data extension whenever this field is blank, and we're pulling in a backup name for that subscriber. Unfortunately, that backup name is full name, so it's first name and last name. So what we want to do for our second use case is improve this experience for the end user. We just want to render Patty here and not Patty Carlson. So this is how we're going to use that substring function. We're going to take this variable that's being outputted, and we want to cut it up so that we're only rendering out the first name. So let's go back into our header script and dive into how we can do that. So let's see here. So we're going into, this is the function in our code that is setting that greeting variable. Again, it's looking up in that universal file for that full name, and it's outputting it as greeting. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to hit another line here, and this is where we're going to want to set this greeting variable to a new variation of it using the substring function. So let's go into the substring function and sort of understand how this is used. Okay, so the syntax is relatively straightforward. You include the first variable, which is what you want to use as your variable to cut up. And then the second variable is where you want to start in your string. And then the last part is the maximum length of that string. So in the example that they gave, the variable is A, B, C, D, E, F. We're starting at the second point, the second bed, which is B. And the variable that we want to output is only 2 characters long. So that's why we're seeing B and C. So let's just copy this syntax in, and we can try to make this a variation for our use case. So we're going to want to set it to substring, and we are using this value, which we know is the first and last name that's being generated. So we're going to copy that in here, and that's the first variable. And then we know that since that first name starts on the first line, we know the number 1 is going to be there. That's straightforward. The tricky part is, how do we determine where it ends? How do we know the length, whether it's Patty, whether it's a different name? They're all going to be different. So how do we determine that? So what we're going to be able to use here is index of. That index of function gives you the ability to understand where within a string there's a certain point. And in this example, the point that we're looking for is the break or the space between the first and the last name. So let's go into index of. Let's try to understand what how we can use it for this use case. So again, it returns the character position of where that string occurs in the variable. And there's 2 points. There's the variable itself, and then the characters or the group of characters that you want to find the position in. It's kind of helpful just to sort of see the example that they've got here. So index of, the variable is ABC, you will love our product. And this is love. We want to find out what position love starts. And so it's the 10th position. So let's copy this syntax. And we're going to use this to use an R use case to see if we can pull out Patty. And we're literally going to just drop it right in here. So again, our variable is now the greeting. So we want to find within greeting, we want to find where there's a space, and that delineates when the first name ends and the last name begins. So all we're going to do here is just use a space. And then let's preview this and see what we get as a net result doing that. So when we preview it, let's just go off the record. So an example, so Paul's rendering, and we go to Patty. So now we're seeing Patty come through, right? Her last name is no longer present here, which is great. But we're also seeing there's a space here, which isn't ideal. So it's not doing it exactly. Yeah, it's doing it for all these variations. There's this extra space. So it's close, but now we need to figure out, how can we get rid of this extra space? Because we want it to look perfect. So to do that, we're going to use another function that Michelle covered, which is the subtract function. We basically want to take the value that the index of returned, but we want to minus it by 1 space so that it'll not capture the space there. So let's go back into our content block, and let's figure out a way to add this functionality into our substring function. So to do that, let's go into our handy guide here. Let's go up to the math functions and let's find out how subtract works. Maybe we can use the code here for that example. So subtract is relatively straightforward. You have your variable is the first variable that you're looking to reduce. And then we're also looking to determine how much we want to reduce it by. So in this case, it would probably be, in our case, it would be 1. So let's copy this syntax for subtract. Let's just copy the first part of it. And we're going to go here into our, so this is where we're going to want to subtract the index of greeting. That's going to be our first variable here. And then all we're going to want to do is we want to subtract it by 1. So this index of is going to return a number, say it's 9 or 10 or wherever that space is included. And then all we're going to do is take that number and we're going to reduce it by 1. And hopefully that should return a variable that should work. I just want to make sure I put that paren in the right place. So this index of comma 1 is ended here, and that's ended here, and then this surrounds this entire substring. So I think that looks right. Let me just preview that, and hopefully we can see, yeah, so there that space is going now. So that's how you use that subtract function within index of and within the substring function, all those included. Okay, so that was kind of a fun way to use index of and subtract and substring. One more thing that I want to add a little bit more functionality to this build is that we only want to do this step if there is a space in the variable. So we don't want to perform this step if there's just one full name. So to do that, we're going to do an if statement, and we're going to use index of in a different way. So we're going to use index of, and we're going to use this greeting variable. And then we're just going to look for that same space again. And then instead of outputting the number, all we're going to do is we're going to use a statement of if it's basically found, if this variable has a, and we don't care what the count is, then we know that we want to perform this function. So this is a way you can use index of in an if statement to flag variables. So I'm just going to add an end if in here. And then let's just quickly preview that just to make sure that I didn't blow up anything in this email. Okay, so same result. And we're going to go through that in our next demo, a little bit more on that, how to use that index of as a flag. But just wanted to call that out. Okay, one more thing while we're in this demo use case. We want to improve how this is looking, and this is where we're going to use the proper case and also the formatting. So you can see Patty is all caps, Kristen is lower caps. So the data coming through here is really, unpredictable. So let's go back into the string functions and look at all the different options that we have for formatting. So we've got options for lowercase where you can output everything in lowercase. We've got it for uppercase. I think proper case is going to be the one that we want. It's going to output with the first letter initial capped. So let's just copy this syntax. Super easy. It's just the proper case and the variable inside of it. And then we're just going to go into this content and we're going to replace this V function with proper case here. And then let's just see how that returns when we preview this. Hopefully we'll see it with it initial capped and no more all caps, no more lower caps. And there we go. We've got Patty with the initial caps. We've got Kristen with the initial caps. So that's all looking good. Simple, straightforward way to use those formatting functions. And then one more use case, we want to output a better version of this today. So let's output the actual day so that when they get this email, they know what they're looking for. So let's go back into the format function. So this gives you an ability to take a variable that's being passed and format it in a certain format depending on the different way that you'd like to output the data. So here's an example. We're literally going to take this code because it's super handy. The variable is going to be now. It's going to output the actual date of when this email gets sent, which is super handy. This now function, I think, was covered in an earlier session. And it's going to output it in this format. So let's just copy. I'm going to copy this entire section. And then we're going to just drop it right into our code. And let's go in here. And we're just going to replace today with this code. And then let's just see how this outputs. Okay, so it comes through, today, 6/20/23. Not the best front facing. So let's go in and let's modify this. There's a lot of different options of how you can tailor how this looks. In the Ampscript guide for the format, it gives you a lot of different variations, so it can be helpful for you to determine how you want to output this. So for example, let's, instead of outputting 06, how about we output, instead of today, let's do Friday, September, we'll just, output September 15th, 2023 instead of the 6/20/23. So we're going to want to use this, 4 capped M's and then 2 small d's. So let's go back into our Ampscript and we're just going to change it's populated. So we're going to use, so for today, it's going to be, we're going to use, it was MMM as month, we'll use comma, and then it was day for, so that would be June 20th, 2023. So let's just see how that renders. Just to sort of improve this, make it look a little cleaner. There we go. So June 20th, 2023. It's a little bit more customer facing. So a lot of options there in that format tool. It's just a nice, easy way to improve the personalization using that functionality. Okay, one more quick use case. This goes back to what we had done in the second week, where we want to output all the different uses of the different steps to maximize your experience as an ambassador. So we're going to use Concat in a different way here for this use case, and also index of. So let's go back into our 4th section where we've got we're doing a lookup ordered rows to those welcome steps, and we've got a for loop that is outputting every single one of those steps. Currently, I've just got the output, which we're outputting here, only set to a single step. So we want to change this so that we can output not only the step, but we want to output the month. And not only that, we want to keep stacking them. So if they have multiple steps and months, it's going to output those all in one sort of basic table. So again, we're going to use the concat function. And the first thing that we want to add to the concat function is the step output itself. So this will give us the ability to stack steps one on top of the other. So each time it goes through, it's just going to add it, numerate it on top of it. So the first thing we're going to output is the step, but we kind of want to have this be in bold. So we're going to add a bold tag so that the step comes out in bold. And then we're going to close that bold tag after the step. And let's put that in a single quote just so that we follow that syntax. And then let's use this bonus month. That's the other thing we want to output. And we can end that with a quote. Let's just add a space there. And now we're going to add in this bonus month variable. And then we want to end this with a BR tag so that it creates an extra space when it adds multiple welcome steps. So there we go. There's another example of concat where we're using a combination of variables and text, but also using concat in a way where we're not only concatting a single line, we're concatting multiple lines. So this is how you can build tables by adding the value that you're setting there. So let's just check and preview this to see if I set this up correctly. Okay, so here's where we've got the difference. Now we're seeing 3 different steps for this one user. We've added a bold to that first step. We've added in the bonus month, and then a paren, and then the final value, which is the bonus month itself. And then since we've added that bold return, each step is on its own line. So that's sort of a way to use concat and a little bit more complicated output, not just a single line, but rendering multiple lines or multiple sections of content. One last thing that I'd like to do is that we want to use index of. I want to give you one more cycle of how to use index of as a flag. So what we want to do is we want to output this content block only when a step includes add, or when it uses warranty. So this step has covered warranty. We want to output this. Let's look at another example. So this person does not have a warranty step. So we want to hide this in the content. So let's use index of, another way of using index of to indicate that. So we're going to go down into our step, because that's what's designates whether there's warranty or not. We're going to use that if statement, index of, and then it is step that we're looking to check. And then the second variable in this is going to be warranty. Whenever there is warranty, it's basically going to say if warranty is in any position in this variable, then do this. So what we're going to do is we're going to set a warranty variable. We'll set that to true. And then we're going to do an end if just to follow process. So if warranty is included in the step, we're going to set this variable warranty equals to true, and if. And then let's just copy this variable because we just need to add a simple if statement in this content to only render it if it's equal to true. So let's go in here and we're just going to do some inline Ampscript. So we're going to do % bracket if warranty is equals true, then, and we're going to close that Ampscript block. And then we're going to come down here to the end of this block and we're going to do a end if inline as well. Okay, I think that was set up correctly. The proof will be in the pudding. Let's preview this and see if that worked. Okay, so no warranty in any of these steps. So we're not seeing that block. Let's go to one that has it. There it is. There's that block. So another way of using index of to use it as a flag, very helpful way using in your if statement logic. Any questions? I know we just covered a ton on concat, on index of, substring, subtract. Any questions that I can answer while I'm in the platform?
I'm not sure if you already answered it, Tim. I'm going to read it again. When we use the format function, is that possible to select the language for the output when using the string month format?
Correct. Yes. So you can use any language that you want. There's a ton of different options here. So if we go back into the example that we had, yeah, you have complete control over how you want to format it, as long as you use the exact syntax that is, I'm not sure how this is set, but if you just follow the guide, you can create it and add, and no matter how many different variations you want to use, you have that flexibility.
Awesome. Thanks much, Tim. And it was a detailed and informational session. Thank you once again. And I think those are all the questions that we have in the chat. Anybody else has any questions, please put them in the chat. So as of now, we're done with 7 sessions, which covered the functions, the basic functions and the advanced functions. So the next 3 sessions in this bootcamp will be focused on specific use cases. So as Tim shared in the very beginning of this session, the 3 sessions that were upcoming, these 3 will cover the use cases, some specific use cases, and how we're going to implement that in the org. So that will be a detailed demo. And if you haven't, if you're not already part of the Phoenix Marketers group, please do join the group. So you will get automated notifications whenever an event is created. So I'm yet to publish the next 3 events. I will do that in a day or 2. So soon after it's published, make sure you register to that. And all the recordings will be available. So the first 5 sessions are available. I'm going to upload the session 6 and session 7 as well. And if you don't have any questions, we can wrap this up. And any other questions post this session, you can put them in the Slack channel so we can address them. And thank you once again. Thanks, Tim, so much.
Thank you.
And we hope to see you in the next sessions. Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Bye.